Welcome back. Thank you for staying with us on The Explainer tonight. Faith Odhiambo, President of the Law Society of Kenya, joins us once again on the program tonight. Please keep your questions and comments coming at Citizen TV Kenya, at Yvonne Okwara. If you'd like to send us a text message, the number is 22422. We're looking out for your questions and your comments as well. Faith, let's start by talking about the upcoming election. In 2 days, that's on Thursday, members of the Law Society of Kenya will be going to the polls to decide who will lead them over the next 2 years in various positions. But what would you like to see the next president do?
I'd like to see the next president focusing on completing the projects that I left behind. I have my legacy project, which we started, the Wakili Towers. And that's a baby that I want to ensure happens. I want to see us having our CPD unit, having an institute, and focusing on the new and emerging areas of practice. We still have a long way and role to play with regards to the disagreements we continue to have with SRC, particularly on the numeration of our colleagues on the in-house councils, and even that bigger discussion of the legal fees that are paid to our members, and also the fees that are paid to those employed at the office of the DPP or the Attorney General's office. I think LSK going forward needs to play a higher advocacy role. But most importantly, I want to see the rule of law continue to be a strong force, that the voice of law society has risen to the levels that it has today, and we can't afford a leader who is going to kill the voice of the law society. 2027 is coming, and this nation will need the voice of the law society. We've seen challenges of what has happened in the last 2 years. The media will need that voice, particularly just raising concern on the intimidation tactics that we have continued to see, civil society, and most importantly, the people of Kenya. So I hope to see a leader that is going to raise up to the occasion, that it's not just member services and welfare, which are quite important, but also a strong voice that this nation can listen to. A colleague of mine was making fun that lawyers are the heartbeat of conscience of the nation. And if that is so, more than ever should the leader who is sitting at that seat be mindful that his voice should be clear, cogent, and be able to stand up not only for our members of the profession, but most importantly for the people of Kenya.
And we'll much to talk about in terms of where we go with the practice and, of course, the rule of law. But before that, there's things that can't wait. Let's talk about what we saw earlier this week. Young lawyers were out on the streets protesting alleged sexual harassment in law firms. Sexual harassment of interns in law firms of all places. Faith, how does it even begin to happen?
Well, we have the sexual harassment policy that was passed in 2019. But based on even the complaint that we got to learn of later this week, because the complainant filed her complaint before the disciplinary tribunal sometimes in September, October, the decision came out in December. And she also indicated that that decision took time before it was communicated to her. And for us, we're realizing and seeing the gaps that are there, because she is one person who came out, and yet the decision was not satisfactory. I may not agree with the decision of the disciplinary tribunal, but measures that now we are taking is we're setting up an investigative team that will collate information independent from the tribunal or the council, and will be able to collate themselves and be able to also set up how they will be able to transmit that information to the disciplinary tribunal, and see measures of how can they protect these young lawyers. It's the unfortunate part is the power imbalance that continues to be. You're a young associate, that's your boss, and also failure of knowledge of the policies that are there and how you can get help. And so we are hoping that this anti-sexual harassment committee that we're going to set in place, members will be able to come out and complain in large numbers. We'll be able to collate and get what is the situation and how can we quickly deal with it, because we want to give it a 30-day limitation period on collating of this information, and further looking at the gaps that are now there under that sexual harassment policy, and how can we change it now into force of law by having it as regulations, that we can deal with this crime with the strength that it deserves. I've had discussions with the chair of the senior council bar as well that, you know, a majority who are accused are the seniors. And so they are also looking at measures in how they can crack down on seniors in the legal profession, that they must be mindful of the challenge, that mentorship, seniors should be seen as symbols of mentorship, not sexual harassment and intimidation in the society.
Under the current policy, what are the consequences for offenders? So
it's deemed more of a professional misconduct that come with a fine, suspension, and even your license can be taken away from you. But I think we need to also look at what other tougher measures can be set into place, and how can we seamlessly work also with investigative bodies like the DCI.
Because it's a criminal matter.
Yes, it is a criminal matter. Yeah. So that apart from the professional sanctions, we deal with it also on the criminal side. I think also, we had a consultative meeting with various stakeholders, including Kenya National Commission, FIDA Kenya, Kenya School of Law representatives, amongst others. And we're able to draw also the challenge that is there, because there's no direct relationship between the students under the Law Society. And so we are thinking of also how we can ensure that that mechanism also covers students. The moment you take up a young intern or a pupil under your office, then that regulation also will find you accountable. Because the challenge that they currently have is if a student complains, they either change you, but there is no mechanism to hold that particular individual, because someone else unknowingly will go and work in that same law firm. And unless we have stricter sanctions, then we'll not be able to deal with this once and for all.
Okay. What would you say is the scope of this crisis? I mean, when it forces lawyers to troop in numbers to the streets, it might suggest that there is a bigger magnitude. Would you know about the scale in terms of the numbers, maybe the spread of such cases or allegations of sexual harassment?
Well, we don't know the scale, because I think most people fear coming forward to give, because even the one complainant indicated there were 20 others who were affected, but the 20 others did not come forward. And so for us, it tells us that this would be, an opportunity to deal with this. It's like a hidden secret that no one wants to come forward, and most likely it's because of the fear of retaliation or being identified as somebody who has undergone sexual harassment in one way or another. And hence we want that anti-sexual harassment committee to be able to collate and put the numbers together, because we want to set it apart from where the secretariat will be. We will not use secretariat members, so that there is the highest confidentiality, and that we're able to encourage members to file even anonymous claims, and that we're able to now get the extent of the magnitude of this vice. And measures that we want to take is that we're going to work with the branch chairs, that we do it all around the country, to ensure that those even who feel that the Law Society is only closer to those in Nairobi, we can ensure this is done all around the country, that we'll be able to do a proper mapping and understand the extent and magnitude of how big this problem is. Because, yes, seeing young lawyers coming out in those numbers shows that there's a hidden frustration, and we must deal with it head on as the Law Society of Kenya.
I want us to move to an issue, another one that's been in the news lately, and this is on lawyers representing government entities in court. You have defended it as the right to an earning for lawyers. But there are those who are against it, and they've raised some pertinent questions of corruption and possible siphoning of billions of taxpayers' money paid out potentially as legal fees. Madam President, Don't you think legal representation has been used in this respect to perpetuate corruption at both national and county government?
Well, I would say that, first of all, it's right to representation. And look at national government or county governments. They're sued on a day-to-day basis. Even if you talk about the Office of the Attorney General, almost all petitions attach the Office of the Attorney General. As much as she has a big force behind her, she may not have the adequate expertise which she found in private practice. Look at IBC, the number of claims that are filed during election petition period, and they have a timeline of 6 months. If you say the paltry number of 5 to 10 lawyers to deal with over, 300 petitions, it's not going to be possible. Government will continue to lose cases. And I think there are adequate measures. The advocates mostly base their fees on the advocate's remuneration order. And apart from that, you can enter into contractual services for an advocate. But even if you don't agree, you can go and challenge the fees in court, and it's taxed before a tax master by the judiciary, which is independent from the advocate. And so there are various measures in how these can be dealt with. And also, not to say that we're covering for corruption. There are instances which, of course, there is corruption. And those measures, that's why we have the ESCC, we have the DCI, amongst others, that can help investigate and hold these particular advocates accountable. So the measure, I find it quite ludicrous to give blanket orders against the entire profession in a nation without looking at the case-to-case basis. You can't tell me of my advocates who are 27,000 in number and 18,000 in practice, all of them are guilty. We have to pick the cases that are there, bring them also to the Law Society and raise these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 members have been misusing, because you'll always find it's a given clique or a small number that are being used for such circumstances. Then we deal with them in accordance with the law.
We understand legal fees and how they're structured, but I think Kenyans are also perhaps puzzled by the high cost of legal fees. For some of these cases. And of course, that cost is being taken up by the taxpayer, obviously. I mean, cases where you see legal fees of 3 million shillings being charged for perhaps a county government where the case is involving amounts of up to 500,000 shillings. And Kenyans worry about, some of these figures in their billions that are owed to law firms.
Well, okay, to pay legal fees of 3 million for 500,000, that's a case that has to be investigated, because even if you look at the remuneration order, it can't come to that amount. It would be a very meager amount that you'd pay a legal fees. And so that's why I say that there's also taxation. Just because somebody has given you a fee note of this amount doesn't mean you pay that legal amount. If you don't agree, go and challenge it in court. And that's why we have courts for such purposes. Those amounts can be taxed. And I say this is a lazy approach to say, deal blanketly, all lawyers are bad. It's a fallacy, and it cannot hold. There are individual lawyers who are unscrupulous. Those individual lawyers should be held accountable. And we've seen several being charged before courts. And I say this, if you look at the huge bulk of the amount of money lost in our taxpayers' fees, it's not from legal fees. Look at how much is lost in construction. Yet we see so many, government has so many professionals under its hire. I was even tongue-in-cheek talking about how recently the Bill of State House with regards to catering services comes in billions, and no one is asking hard questions about those. Yet legal fees is the only one that continues to come on this scope of the spectrum. And I say this because these same litigants had come before Senate in an attempt to cap and say external lawyers should not be hired. And the same was reviewed, analyzed, and thrown out. The Senate did not agree with them. Now they're found where they could forum shop to get court orders. The reality is, deal with aspects of the profession that are rogue, but you can't blanketly blame everyone, because people work hard for these fees. And if you look at the burgeoning pending bills, lawyers spend their money to prepare and handle these bills, yet you're paid 5, 10, 15 years, irrespective of getting court orders, having taxed the bill. And so that blanket, trying to say that all lawyers fall within that blanket, doesn't make sense.
All right, let's stay within the legal profession. Recently, Madam President, you appeared in photographs at a meeting that very little has been said about. In that photo, you were flanked by the Chief Justice, Martha Koome, senior counsels Philip Murgor, Ahmed Nasser Abdullahi, and Nelson Havi. What was that about? Well,
the meeting was about two of our senior members have continuously raised concerns about jurispresa and corruption in our courts. Knowing the importance of the judiciary being the last bulwark for the people of Kenya, I believe they're still the last arm of government that Kenyans still hold faith in at the end of the day, that you'd have a fair day in court. And it's these aspects of corruption and failings in integrity of certain offices that members continue to raise concern. And these being senior counsels who have practiced for years before these courts, they raised great concern. And senior counsel Ahmed Nasser had been even barred from appearance in the Supreme Court because of his strong views. And the Law Society had even filed a case against the Supreme Court judges because we didn't believe he had been given a right to a fair hearing. A decision was made in his absence, but the court has since reviewed the same, and he's now allowed to appear and his law firm. But the reality is that discussion was for us to sit and put to the table the challenges that continue to be there. LSK had set up even the Efficacy and Ethics Committee to collate complaints from Kenyans on what is happening in the judiciary, instances of injustice, and would help them collate and prepare to table before the Judicial Service Commission. And the same that some of our seniors continued to raise. And they agreed that they want to work with the Chief Justice to support her, but she must commit to fighting corruption.
Okay.
So that was their bottom line.
So she must commit to that. However, this was a private meeting?
Yes, yes.
With a private resolution?
Yes.
Of matters of grave concern, of corruption?
Yes.
Specific judges were mentioned, specific amounts of corruption were mentioned. Why have private resolution of a matter that was raised so publicly? So what are we to make then of the allegations that the two members of the senior council have made in the past against several judges of the court?
Well, they have not withdrawn their complaints. What they decided that they will not be making the public utterances of abusing the Chief Justice and the Supreme Court judges with regards to their complaints, but they will table through the channels. And they wanted a commitment from the Chief Justice that when they table these complaints, they will be actioned, that they shall not be swept under the carpet, they shall not be ignored. And that was their concession, that they can avoid the public utterances of abuse and bringing down the office of the Chief Justice, because the public still relies on this office holder to uphold the rule of law. So they're saying that they will not give up on their complaints, they will not give up on pursuing complaints of incompetence. And even if you see, even the next day right after that meeting, the list came out for the Court of Appeal judges that were shortlisted. And Ahmed Nasser tweeted also raising concern that they sees faces that we believe should not be there and merited judges that should be on that list. So they have not given up their fight. What they have given up is the blatant abuse.
Yeah, but they also made some serious allegations, against the Chief Justice of the country, saying she was soft on corruption, was condoning it almost and allowing it to happen. Now, when serious allegations are made of this, that obviously has an effect on access to justice for ordinary Kenyans who go before these courts. So allegations like these have been made, strong ones at that, and those judges have been put in a certain light for litigants who will go before them, who then now look at them and say, okay, juris spesa, we've heard you've been mentioned in this and that case, before the Supreme Court itself, at which allegations were made, by the way, not just against the CJ, but against almost all members of the Supreme Court. So where does that leave members of the public and the trust that they have, or perhaps the trust that may have been eroded by some of these public statements when a meeting then happens in private, and now we hear, well, there won't be these statements anymore? What are we to make of this meeting and its outcome?
No, they've not said they will not make statements on corruption. What they have said, they will not abuse the Chief Justice and the Supreme Court judges and the other judges, but they will continue to make noise and complain. I think you also recently saw Senior Counsel Nelson Harvey as well raise complaint of a judicial officer as he was going to carry out his interviews, and you were able to see the CRJ also write a letter to that judicial officer to respond to concerns that were raised during their tenure and why they and to respond to those allegations that were made. So their commitment is they will continue to do the work. They will continue to raise their voice. And they wanted that commitment from the Chief Justice that this will not be ignored, merely because we've sat together, and the commitment is limited to the extent that if they feel the Chief Justice is not honoring, is not dealing with these cases, is sweeping them under the carpet, then they will, all truths will be gone.
Well, the process of raising issues with judges is well laid out, including petitioning the Judicial Service Commission, triggering a tribunal to investigate the conduct of judges who stand accused. Why not just go through that route instead of making, accusations in the public domain? Is it that they do not have faith in the JSC?
Well,
and do you, as
you know, Yvonne, we have seen a lot of frustration, even raising those concerns. And I believe a better part of last year or early last year, we had there was a lot of tension between the Law Society Council and the judiciary because of the refusal to handle certain cases and handle them expeditiously. If you saw even certain complaints were in court as well with the JSC, because a 3-judge bench sat and decided until rules on a code of conduct are done, then you cannot prosecute corrupt judges. And so for us, it's a great frustration when you continue to see also the same court processes are used to stop any prosecution from happening. And also the challenge that and the frustration that is felt, because when you file a case against a judicial officer, and even before the judicial officer is given the issues to respond to, the Judicial Service Commission deems it that they respond on behalf of that judicial officer and tell you, according to their view, they do not see any case to be answered. But there's been an injustice. Someone has lost the opportunity for their matter to be heard and determined. And telling someone to appeal is not a remedy. Because look at the challenges Kenyans already face, and even the court filing fees. Before, and even the years that it takes for that matter to be heard and determined. So you tell me an appeal process, then that is good enough. And even when I want to question the decision in the ruling, you tell us it's judicial independence. And those are the fights that we continue to have with the Judicial Service Commission. And that's why the frustration that when we feel ignored and these responses continue to come up, even after filing several petitions, that's when the noise comes out. And that's what the frustration you've been seeing, not only from the senior counsels, but even the Law Society of Kenya. Because you can't keep paper pushing and telling us that according to you, you have looked at it and there's no case to answer. But at the end of the day, the devil is at the detail. The only way you can read corruption is on the reasoning and the decision-making process of a judicial officer. So if you tell me I cannot touch that decision, that is independence, then how will we ever catch corrupt judges or magistrates? Because members of parliament, you can change them after 5 years. You don't want them anymore. The executive, you can decide you're not voting for them. But the moment a judicial officer gets into office, unless we have a strong Judicial Service Commission that is able to discipline them or ensure that they leave service, then we will continue to face these frustrations until they turn the age of retirement.
Do we have a strong Judicial Service Commission?
I would say it's arguable. I would say it's arguable because we have not seen much of the cases and of them holding accountable judicial officers. We'll see a few magistrates here and there, but we are not seeing the big fish that really affect us, the judges. They are the ones who make the most, the decisions that make the biggest turning point. And we want to see more heads roll because, you know, even Chitembo's case, if it didn't come out in the public limelight the way it did, we would have been facing a situation whereby we would be going back to our courts. But because there was even recordings that were done, and you see, you can't expect that kind of dramatics for every single person. And that's why we are demanding that the Judicial Service Commission should actually have some bite. You can't just be hiring people and saying there's nothing you can do or answering or responding to them. Sometimes even that essence of submitting that complaint and telling that judicial officer, answer this, let's hear your reasoning, it's stifling enough to prevent the wanton corruption.
So you're expressing quite a bit of frustration then. How would you generally rate the relationship between the bar and the bench in general?
Well, I would say that it's still a bit of a challenge because you've seen the kind of demonstrations we've had the last 2 years. We've had a large number of demonstrations against different judicial officers around the country. I've had to appear in several stations, mediating standoffs between different judicial officers and the members of the bench, demanding the removal. And even when some are removed from one station to another, there's rejection, they will refusal to accept. There are certain cases that have been raised, even questions to the judiciary, and they are not able to respond. So their response is to transfer until, you know, further notice. And that's why you continue to see advocates going to the streets. And it'll get to a point that the relationship will be beyond repair. And hence that kind of frustration that we continue to see.
So just as we close on this issue, as president of the bar, what redress do you think judges have when faced with attacks from advocates, especially on platforms such as social media? The issue between Senior Counsel Abdul Nasser Abdullahi and his appearance before the Supreme Court has been resolved. But what can judges do when the situation, like you said, we've seen happening with them under attack on social media? Do they have any redress?
Well, what we have tried to establish is we have a mediation between the council and through the KMJ, which we've been able to handle at least 2 or 3 cases. And they've been able to raise their concern, particularly on what happens when judges face intimidation and abuse on social media platforms. And what we try to do is bring more dialogue between the caucuses and having better bar bench relationships. Because by the time you see advocates going to post on social media, it shows the level of frustration that you feel there's no avenue to, you know, redress those concerns. And we've seen even back and forth between judicial officers and advocates on the online platforms, which are quite unpalatable.
Yeah, and it seems like it's washing dirty linen in public without proper means to resolve it from people we expect to know how to handle disputes and resolve them.
Well, you know, respect is a two-way street. So we have a different street of lawyers in town who will not take to, you know, when we were younger, we'd see files being thrown in physical court, but these ones are words being thrown on virtual courts, and this breed of lawyers will not take it down, lying down. And so we've been trying to work on those mediation processes for those that are possible. But I think bridging on building stronger relationships and having the bar benches work better is the only avenue that I think will ensure that people don't feel the frustration to have to go on social media.
Let's focus on matters of governance. We know we've heard you speak out on what happened, you know, at the church in Odhiambo a couple of Sundays ago. But that was followed quickly by more disruption of events that are being held by members of the opposition recently in Kitengela, where one person was shot dead, Nyamakima yesterday as well. How does it make you feel when you see, the events unfolding as they are?
The National Police Service continues to be under greater scrutiny. And, it's a great failure that it's a constitutional body that ought to be independent. And we've seen the CS of Interior continue to say that they're independent, they make the independent decisions, yet they continue to be seen as an appendage of the executive. And I think it'll reach a point that the courts must bite harder with regards to the fines or actions they take against those in command responsibility. As we see the growing frustrations going on in the country, I fear for what is yet to come, because you will not force people into submission, not only in social media and as they have seen, or on the streets. People still want to come out and express themselves. So what we are urging the citizenry to is to prepare for warfare. Because if we have a National Police Service that is very quick to action in terms of causing harm, yet very slow in investigation, to date we've not been able to see arising from Othaya who is going to be held accountable, who has been arrested. We get statements that all the internal investigation is working. We now see IPOA chair is no longer there. The refusal to date to give the deployment plan to the IPOA. We are preparing our citizenry to react more violently. And I say it's quite unfortunate that this is happening even at the aspects that government continues to say that we will obey court orders, we will find ways of engaging with the citizenry, yet we continue to see there's great intolerance to opposition. Because in a democracy, we see government campaigning every single day as they launch their projects. We don't see the National Police Service tear-gassing the same, yet we see any opposition rally being tear-gassed and there's loss of life. And we need to see action, because those individuals, unless they're caught on camera, we are not able to see any action taken against them.
And during your tenure, of course, we've talked about the loss of life that continues in events such as these, in which the police are involved. And during your tenure, we saw you representing many, and of course coming to represent those who'd been abducted, helping the families of those whose kin were missing. And that may have been the hallmark of your tenure in office. But then there was the issue of compensation and that commission that was put in place. Help us understand why you agreed to be a part of this.
Well, Yvonne, looking at the challenges that we continue to have and the families asking for answers and support, as a law society, the best we can do is give you legal representation and follow up with your matters in court and assist with the various partners that you get the psychosocial support where possible. And families continue to grapple with the question of how will and who will be held accountable. And also there's no that recognition and acceptance. And for me, I saw the panel as an opportunity to hold government accountable. They are accepting that these are the number of people, the statistics of the people who have been killed, because to date we continue to see the denials that have there. The CS continue to deny these people were killed, who was injured. And that first confirmation and acceptance and recognition of families that have suffered, families that have lost their loved ones. And I made a commitment when I took up that role on what role I wanted to take and what I wanted to do for the victims. Because I feel like it would end up being a campaign rhetoric that if that wasn't taken up, they would be forgotten. And I fear that as we near the 2027 election, that is what is going to happen. But the moment the court gave orders, the conservatory orders, I saw we were dragging time and nothing was happening on behalf of the Kenyans. And we are not going to be able to fulfill the mandate that my hope was that there's a structure created that can be able to support administratively for the victims to get that support and also that recognition of who was killed, and government to take that responsibility that they owed a duty of care and they failed in that duty. And the moment I saw that was not going to happen, I stepped down from that committee. Currently, the courts have said Kenya National Commission has that sole mandate. And I've been supporting Kenya National Commission that in any way how they want to form the legal process and how they want to run this process, that we are there to give them all the necessary support in them structuring how they want to run it.
But did you agree with the court's decision then that this panel was unconstitutional and that role should have been taken up by the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights, which you say you support? Well,
I agree. Once court orders are given, you must obey court orders unless they're set aside or reviewed or appealed upon. And so as it is, that is the decision of the court, and that's the decision that we abide by. You know, the essence of that committee was to propose a working structure, and Kenya National Commission was part of that structure. And the aim was to develop something that can now work. How can the coordinating agencies ensure that these victims are recognized, that there's a structure in how they can be paid? And the role, and my purview was that it was never supposed to take up the responsibility. In any event, the implementing body was going to be the Kenya National Commission, because that was our task force. Task force don't implement.
So you don't feel like that was usurping the role of the National Commission on Human Rights?
Well, I felt that that was an assisting role. They were not ever going to implement anything. Kenya National reserves the sole right of implementation. And so my purview was it was going to assist, come up with a proposed structure, which of course would have to go for public participation, then it goes to the National Assembly. If it's being made into law, then it will be structured under the Kenya National.
What did you think of Kenyans' frustrations with you taking up this role, considering it was by a government, or shall we say administration, that has itself not taken responsibility for putting people in a position in which they needed compensation in the first place? In fact, there was great debate even over the numbers of those missing, killed during the June 2024 and June 2025 protests. What did you feel, or how did you take the frustrations of Kenyans with you for taking up this position and then turning back on it?
Well, first of all, Yvonne, I think hard decisions sometimes must be made. And, you know, it wasn't an easy period, because these are the same Kenyans that I'd walked hand in hand with. And there was so much anger, which I had to accept and acknowledge. And because I think the kind of relationship that government had since accumulated with its people was of a lot of hate and anger and frustration. And that was, I think, a direct reflection that was made, because people felt I was giving up on the people of Kenya and that I'd decided to sell myself to the government of the day. But my challenge that I looked upon was that this task force was going to be set up. Who would stand in the gap for these victims in terms of what they have gone through? Would they be made to sign agreements without somebody standing as their voice to give them, to explain to them their rights, and also protect them from that element of being violated, that this is just being seen as a compensation without also getting that acknowledgement that this wrong had been done, and also still maintaining your right to pursue criminal proceedings, because administrative compensation doesn't mean you lose your right to pursue those perpetrators, which ought to be pursued. And that's why I made that decision. But I say that it was not an easy period of time, seeing the anger, seeing the frustration, and also balancing with also the Kenyans who still feel frustrated today that I left that role, who feel that I ought to have ensured they are compensated, I ought to have stood on their gap. And so it's always that hard balance of the two competing voices, the victims vis-a-vis the large number of Kenyans who felt frustrated that I took up that role.
All right. I want us to get to, we've got quite a few questions and comments coming in. But Before that, what would you say has been your legacy as president of the Law Society of Kenya over the last 2 years?
I think the rule of law. I ran on the mantra of PSP, protection of the rule of law, stability of the bar, and progress in the bar and our welfare and practice. And I think that is a legacy that I've been able to run on. The Law Society's voice, protecting and fighting for the rule of law, not only on governance concerns. You've talked about my huge part of my legacy being led on representing a lot of the Gen Zs, dealing with the new element of use of the portal law to charge citizens who came out in large numbers to express themselves on terrorism law, and also fighting back against the National Police Service for excessive use of force and the positive pronouncements that the courts have since made on use of force in our country. But I also say my legacy also lies in the Wakili Towers, us having, in terms of welfare, we have been able to fight more of the masqueraders, and Kenyans have continued to complain, and they've been able to give us tip-offs, and we've been able to work with also the police in ensuring these masqueraders are arrested and prosecuted, having a proper medical cover for members of the Law Society of Kenya, and also the fight in terms of questions of integrity, particularly on judicial officers, that our members have felt frustrated in terms of being able to practice and obtain, decisions based on the strength of your cases. I'd also say, maintaining, irrespective of our differences and the stresses that we had within that 2-year period, I would say my council, we have by and large remained united and stable to be able to give a positive platform for members to continue to get services, and we also run digitization of services, which has also been something that we did within this tenure.
Let's take questions and views from those watching us now. Let's start with this one. Okello James says, Faith has done a stellar job in her tenure as LSK president, safeguarding the rule of law and defending human rights, a quality lacking in many elected leaders today. Ask her if she's considering running for political office in 2027. Are you?
We'll see.
Oh, that is such a political answer.
Yeah, we'll see.
Does politics interest you?
I'd say that I'm very interested in how things are run in this country. Someone said I should say another phrase there, that I'm with somebody. But I admire the work that personalities like Edwin Sifuna has done, and just his strong stand in this nation and this country. And I find it's an interesting time for the nation. Whether I will join politics or not is something that we'll wait and see.
Okay.
Yeah.
So for now, you are with Sifuna?
You're waiting for me to say that strong yes, eh? Yes.
Okay, all right. Engineer Lazaro says the forthcoming general election will be an acid test to the LSK and human rights bodies. We'll let you comment on that. Atiani Maureen says, thank you for the good work as a team. God bless you all. And then P. Vinsky says the LSK's habit of filing bold petitions and then quietly retreating under Faith Odhiambo suggests a susceptibility to executive influence. The fuel levy case is a prime example of how high-profile legal resistance can be neutralized through behind-the-scenes compromises. Let's speak about this for a moment.
So the fuel levy, unfortunately, we file cases through the Public Interest Litigation Committee that I don't personally run. And we got to know about this, unfortunately, after the fact. And so these are lapses that we have noted, and what we're trying to do to ensure that that never happens again is that all filing systems, LSK, will be filed at the e-filing portal system so that notifications come directly to us and not the law firm that is filing on behalf of the Law Society of Kenya. And so we have done so many high-profile cases, including Adani, including is it Microsoft case, amongst others. And so, yes, lapses can happen, but it doesn't mean that we are neutered or we are under state influence. Lapses do happen, particularly when you're filing so many cases. If you note when that case was filed, it was during the high-profile time that we're dealing with all the Gen Z cases. So a ball may have been dropped somewhere, but we have worked to ensure that the systems are a bit more effective and that we're able to control what is happening from the centralized position of the Secretariat.
All right, one last one here from Sir Nixon Dugire says, LSK President, Madam Faith, President William Ruto's administration has faced a high volume of legal challenges with courts nullifying or suspending key policy decisions. Ni sheria haieleweki by his advisors, or what do you think the problem is?
Well, I always say that any government will always try to push its luck with regards to interpretation of the law, and maybe always cue its their implementation on teeter line. Like I would say, even the task force now has been given powers to just advise, trying to neuter itself to the straight line between what the court decision is. But I say that that's the beauty of democracy. Our courts continue to help interpret and put a stop to the same. We still rely on the court's interpretation to be able to push back when the executive overexerts itself. And so that is the beauty of the delicate balance of democracy. So whether he's taking advice or he's not taking advice, noting that he has quite a large legal team, and the Office of the Attorney General being the primary advisor of the head of state. And so I cannot say what happens within those confines, but the courts can tell you what happens within the confines.
Okay. So between now and 2027, when we'll wait to, or months leading to, when we'll wait to hear whether you go into politics or not, what's next for you?
Well, there is still the practice of law that I'll be going back to, and I'm hoping to see support of whichever leadership is coming in. LSK still has a great and important role in that, to ensure the smooth transition for whichever new leader comes in, that they're able to seamlessly take up and kick into the role as fast as possible, because time is moving and soon we'll be going into elections. Yeah.
Seat? Electoral seat?
We've not said if we're going for elections, have we?
Okay. So you're done with one election, but you might be going into another.
We'll see.
When do you hand over, by the way, after the election on Thursday?
I'll hand over on 27th of March at the annual general meeting.
Okay,
yeah.
All right. So still about a month or so to go.
Yeah, so we'll be working with the new elect to ensure that they know their roles, their responsibilities, any networks that will support their office, and how they're able to seamlessly pick up in that role. I'll be doing without period. All
right, thank you. Faith Odhiambo, who is the president of the Law Society of Kenya. They go to the polls in 2 days, after which she will be handing over to the new team that takes over. Thank you for making time for us on The Explainer. Very best of luck.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching. Have a good night. We'll see you again next time.